Good morning. Today we are reading the fourth book in the Left Behind series, and we are on chapter 5. And this is the let's see, what is the name of this book? This book is what is the fourth book? I can't remember. I don't have it in front of me, but I'm going to get it here just a minute. Oh, Soul Harvest. Soul Harvest. So today we're going to be reading the fourth book in the Left Behind series. The name of this book is Soul Harvest. And we are going to be reading in chapter 5 today. So let's begin. Rayford ate with the stragglers at a bountiful breakfast. Across the way, dozens of aides hunched over maps and charts and crowded phone and radio banks. He ate lethargically, Mac next to him drumming his fingers and bouncing a foot. Carpathia sat with Fortunato and other senior staffers at a table not far from his office. Now he pressed his cell phone to his ear and talked earnestly in a corner, his back to the room. Rayford eyed him with disinterest. He wondered about himself now, about his resolve. If it was true Amanda had gone down with the 747, Chloe and Buck and Tyson were all he cared about. Could he be the only Tribulation Force member left standing? Rayford could muster not a whit of interest in whom Carpathia might be talking to or what about. If a gadget allowed him to listen in, he wouldn't even flip the switch. He had prayed before he ate, a prayer ambivalent about sustenance provided by the Antichrist. Still he had eaten, and it was good that he had. His spirits began to lift. No way could he cogently share his faith with Mac if he stayed in a funk. Mac's fidgeting made him nervous. Eager to get flying, Rayford said. Eager to get talking. But not here. Too many ears. But are you up for this, Rayford? With what you're going through? Mac seemed as ready to hear about God as anyone he had ever talked to. Why did it happen this way? When he had been most eager to share, he had tried to get through to his old senior pilot, Earl Halliday, who had had no interest and was now dead. He had tried without success to reach Hattie Durham, and now he could only pray there was still time for her. Here was Mac, in essence, begging him for the truth, and Rayford would rather be back in bed. He crossed his legs and folded his arms. He would will himself to move today. In the corner, Carpathia wheeled around and stared at him, the phone still at his ear. Nikolai waved enthusiastically, then seemed to think better of showing such enthusiasm to a man who had just lost his wife. His face grew somber and his wave stiffened. Rayford did not respond, though he held Carpathia's gaze. Nikolai beckoned with a finger. Oh, no, Max said. Let's go, let's go. But they couldn't walk out on Nikolai Carpathia. Rayford was in a testy mood. He didn't want to talk to Carpathia. Carpathia wanted to talk to him. He could come Rayford's way. What have I become? Rayford wondered. He was playing games with the potentate of the world. Petty, silly, immature. But I don't care. Carpathia snapped his phone shut and slipped it in his pocket. He waved at Rayford, who pretended not to notice and turned his back. Rayford leaned toward Max. So what are we going to teach me today? What are you going to teach me today? Don't look now, but Carpathia wants you. He knows where I am. Ray, he could still toss you in jail. I wish he would. So anyone, what are you going to teach anyway? What are you going to teach me today? Teach you? You've flown whirlybirds. A long time ago, Rayford said. More than 20 years. Chopper jockeying is like riding a bike, Mac said. You'll be as good as me in an hour. Mac looked over Rayford's shoulder, stood and thrust out his hand. Potent Carpathia, sir. Excuse Captain Steele and me for a moment, would you, Officer McCollum? I'll meet you in the hangar, Rayford said. Carpathia slid McCollum's chair close to Rayford and sat. He unbuttoned his suit coat and leaned forward, forearms on his knees. Rayford still had legs crossed and arms folded. Carpathia spoke earnestly. Rayford, I hope you do not mind my calling you by your first name, but I know you are in pain. Rayford tasted bile. Lord, please, he prayed silently, keep my mouth shut. It only made sense that the embodiment of evil himself was the slimiest of liars. To imply that Amanda had been his plant, a mole in the tribulation force for the global community, and then to feign sorrow over her death. A lethal wound to the head was too good for him. Rayford imagined torturing the man who led the forces of evil against the God of the universe. I wish you had been here earlier, Rayford said. Well, actually, I am glad you were able to get the rest you needed. But those of us here for the first breakfast were treated to Leon Fortunato's account of last night. Mac said something about it. Yes, Officer McCullum has heard it twice. You should ask him to share it with you again. Better yet, schedule some time with Mr. Fortunato. It was all Rayford could do to feign civility. I'm aware of Leon's devotion to you. As am I. However, even I was moved and flattered at how his view has been elevated. Rayford knew the story, but couldn't resist baiting Carpathia. It doesn't surprise me that Leon is grateful for your rescuing him. Carpathia sat back and looked amused. McCullum has heard the story twice, and that is his assessment. Have you not heard? I did not rescue Mr. Fortunato at all. I did not even save his life. According to his testimony, I brought him back from the dead. Indeed, I do not claim this for myself, Rayford. I am telling you only what Mr. Fortunato says. You were there. What's your account? Well, when I heard that my most trusted aide and personal confidant had been lost to the ruins of our headquarters, something came over me. I simply refused to believe it. I willed it to be untrue. Every fiber of my being told me to simply go by myself to the site and bring him back. Too bad you didn't take witnesses. You do not believe me? It's quite a tale. You must talk with Mr. Fortunato. I'm really not interested. Rayford, that 50-foot pile of bricks, mortar, and debris has been a 200-foot tall building. Leon Fortunato had been with me on the top floor when that building gave way. Despite the earthquake precautions designed into it, everyone in there should have been killed, and they were. You know, there was no survivors. So you're saying it's Leon's contention and yours that even he was killed in the fall. I called him out of the middle of that wreckage. No one could have survived that. And yet he did. He did not. He was dead. He had to be. And how did you extricate him? I commanded him to come forth, and he did. Rayford leaned forward. That had to make you believe the story of Lazarus. Too bad it's from a book of fairy tales, huh? Now, Rayford, I have been most tolerant and have never disparaged your beliefs. Neither have I hidden that I believe you are, at best, misguided. But yes, it gave me pause that this incident mirrored an account I believe was allegorical. It is true, you used the same words Jesus used with Lazarus. So, Mr. Fortunato says, I was unaware of precisely what I said. I left here with full confidence that I would come back with him, and my resolve never wavered, not even when I saw that mountain of ruins and knew that rescuers had found no one alive. Rayford wanted to vomit. So now you're some sort of deity. That is not for me to say, though clearly raising a dead man is a divine act. Mr. Fortunato believes I could be the Messiah. Rayford raised his eyebrows. If I were you, I'd be quick to deny that unless I knew it to be true. Carpathia softened. It does not seem the time for me to make such a claim, but I am not so sure it is untrue. Rayford squinted. You think you might be the Messiah? Let me just say, especially after what happened last night, I have not ruled out the possibility. Rayford thrust his hands in his pockets and looked away. Come now, Rayford, do not assume I do not see the irony. I am not blind. I know a faction out there, including many of your so-called tribulation saints, labels me as Antichrist, or even the Antichrist. I would delight in proving the opposite. Rayford leaned forward, pulled his hands from his pockets, and entwined his fingers. Let me get this straight. There's a possibility you are the Messiah, but you don't know for sure. Carpathia nodded solemnly. That makes no sense, Rayford said. Matters of faith are mysterious, Carpathia intoned. I urge you to spend time with Mr. Fortunato. See what you think after that. Rayford made no promises. He looked toward the exit. I know you need to go, Captain Steele. I just wanted to share with you the tremendous progress already made in my rebuilding initiative. As early as tomorrow, we expect to be able to communicate with half the world. At that time, I will address anyone who can listen. He pulled a sheet from his coat pocket. Meanwhile, I would like you and Mr. McCollum to load whatever equipment you need onto the 216 and chart a course to bring these international ambassadors to join those who are already here. Rayford scanned the list. It appeared he would fly more than 20,000 miles. Where are you on rebuilding runways? Global community forces are working around the clock in every country. Cellular Solar will network the entire world within weeks. Virtually anyone not on that project is rebuilding airstrips, roads, and centers of commerce. I have my assignment, Rayford said flatly. I would like to know your itinerary as soon as it is set. Did you notice the name on the back? Rayford turned the sheet over. Pontifex Maximus Peter Matthews, Enigma Babylon, One World Faith. So we bring him too? Though he is in Rome, pick him up first. I would like him on the plane when each of the other ambassadors boards. Rayford shrugged. He wasn't sure why God had put him in this position, but until he felt led to leave it, he would hang in. One more thing, Carpathia said. Mr. Fortunato will go with you and serve as host. Rayford shrugged again. Now may I ask you something? Carpathia nodded, standing. Could you let me know when the dredging operation commences? The what? When they pull the Pancon 747 out of the Tigris? Rayford said evenly. Oh, yes, that. Now, Rayford, I have been advised it would be futile. There's a chance you won't do it? Most likely we will not. The airline informed us who was on board, and we know there are no survivors. We are already at a loss for what to do with the bodies of so many victims of this disaster. I have been advised to consider the aircraft a sacred burial vault. Rayford felt his face flush, and he slumped. You're not going to prove to me my wife is dead, are you? Oh, Rayford, is there any doubt? As a matter of fact, there is. It doesn't feel like she's dead. If you know what well, of course you don't know what I mean. I know it is difficult for loved ones to let go unless they see the body. But you are an intelligent man. Time heals. I want that plane dredged up. I want to know whether my wife is dead or alive. Carpathia stepped behind Rayford and placed a hand on each shoulder. Rayford closed his eyes, wishing he could melt away. Carpathia spoke soothingly. Next, you will be asking me to resurrect her. Rayford spoke through clenched teeth. If you are who you think you are, you ought to be able to pull that off for one of your most trusted employees. Buck had fallen asleep atop the bedspread. Now, well after midnight, he couldn't imagine he had slept more than 2 hours. Sitting up, gathering the covers around him, he didn't want to move. But what had awakened him? Had he seen lights flicker in the hallway? It had to have been a dream. Surely electricity would not be reconnected in Mount Prospect for days, maybe weeks. Buck held his breath. Now he did hear something from the other room. The low, whispering cadence of Tyson Ben Judah. Had something awakened him, too? Tyson was praying in his own tongue. Buck wished he understood Hebrew. The prayer grew fainter, and Buck lay back down and rolled onto his side. As he lost consciousness, he reminded himself that in the morning he needed one last look around Loretta's neighborhood, one more desperate attempt to find Chloe. Rayford found Mac in the cockpit of the idle helicopter. He was reading. Finally let you go, did he? Mac said. Rayford always ignored obvious questions. He just shook his head. I don't know how he does it, Mac said. What's that? Mac rattled his magazine. The latest modern avionics. Where would Carpathia get this, and how would he know to stock it in his shelter? Who knows, Rayford said. Maybe he's the god he thinks he is. I told you about Leon's diatribe last night. Carpathia told me again. What? That he agrees with Leon about his own divinity. He's not going that far yet, Rayford said, but he will. The Bible says he will. Whoa, Max said. You're going to have to start from the beginning. Fair enough, Rayford said, unfolding Carpathia's passenger list. First, let me show you this. After my training, I want you to plot our course to these countries. First, we pick up Matthews in Rome. Then, let's go to the States and pick up all the other ambassadors on the way back. Max studied the sheet. Should be easy. Take me a half hour or so to plot it. Are these spots to land in all these places? Are there spots to land in all these places? We'll get close enough. We'll put the chopper and a fixed wing in the cargo hold just in case. So when do we get to talk? Our training session should take until about 5, don't you think? Nah, I told you you'll be up to speed in no time. We'll need to break for a late lunch somewhere, Rayford said, and then we'll still have several hours to train, right? You're not following me, Ray. You don't need a whole day. You don't need a whole day playing with this toy. You know what you're doing, and these things fly themselves. Rayford leaned close. Who's not following whom? He said. You and I are away from the shelter today, training until 1700 hours. Is that understood? Max smiled sheepishly. Oh, you learned the whirlybird by late lunch at around 1, and we're still on leave until 5. You catch on quick. Rayford took notes as Mac walked him through every button, every switch, every key. With the blades at top speed, Mac feathered the controls until the bird lifted off. He went through a series of maneuvers, turning this way and that, dipping and climbing. It'll come back to you quick, Ray. Let me ask you something first, Mac. You were stationed in this area, weren't you? For many years, Mac said, slowly flying south. You know people then. Locals, you mean? Yeah, I couldn't tell you if any of them survived the earthquake. What are you looking for? Scuba equipment. Mac glanced at Rayford, who did not return his gaze. There's a new one for the middle of the desert. Where do you want to go diving? In the Tigris. Mac grinned, but Rayford shot him a serious look, and he paled. Oh, sure. Forgive me, Rayford. Man, you don't really want to do that, do you? I've never wanted anything more, Mac. Now, do you know somebody or not? Let 'em dredge the thing, Ray. Carpathia says they're going to leave it alone. Mac shook his head. I don't know, Ray. You ever scuba dive in a river? I'm a good diver, but no, never in a river. Well, I have, and it's not the same, believe me. The current isn't much calmer at the bottom than the top. You'll spend half your time keeping from getting sucked downstream. You could wind up 300 miles southeast in the Persian Gulf. Rayford was not amused. What's the story, Mac? You got a source for me? Yeah, I know a guy. He was always able to get anything I wanted from just about anywhere. I've never seen scuba stuff around here, but if it's available and he's still alive, he can get it. Who and where? He's a national. He runs the tower at the airstrip down at Al Basra. That's northwest of Abadan, where the Tigris becomes the Shatt al Arab. I wouldn't begin to try to pronounce his real name. To all of his AHM clients, he goes by Albie. I call him Albie. What's his arrangement? He takes all the risk, charges you double retail, no questions asked. You get caught with contraband stuff, he's never heard of you. Try to reach him for me. Just say the word. That's what I'm saying, Mac. Quite a risk. Being honest with you is a risk, Mac. How do you know you can trust me? I don't. I have no choice. Thanks a lot. You'd feel the same way if the shoe was on the other foot. True enough, Max said. Only time will prove I'm not a rat. Yeah, Rayford said, feeling as reckless as he had ever been. If you're not a friend, there's nothing I can do about it now. Uh-huh, but would a fink make a dangerous dive with you? Rayford stared at him. I couldn't let you do that. You can't stop me. If my guy can get a suit and a tank for you, he can get them for me too. Why would you do that? Well, not just to prove myself. I'd like to keep you around a while. You deserve to know if your wife's in the drink, but that dive's going to be dangerous enough for two, let alone solo. I'll have to think about that. For once, quit thinking so much. I'm going with you, and that's that. I got to figure some way to keep you alive long enough to tell me what the devil has been going on since the disappearances. Put her down, Rayford said, and I'll tell you. Right here, right now, right now. Mac had flown a few miles to where Rayford could see the city of Al Halal. He banked left and headed for the desert, landing in the middle of nowhere. He shut the engine down quickly to avoid sand damage. Still, Rayford saw grains on the back of his hands and tasted them on his lips. Let me get behind the controls, Rayford said, unstrapping himself. Not on your life, Mac said. Next, you're going to try starting her up and lifting off. I know you can do it and it's not that dangerous, but Lord knows, nobody else around here can explain things to me. Now, out with it. Let's go. Rayford hopped out and landed in the sand. Mac followed. They strolled half an hour in the sun, Rayford sweating through his clothes. Finally, Rayford led the way back to the helicopter where they leaned against the struts on the shade side. He told Mac his life story, starting with the kind of family he was raised in, decent, hard-working, but uneducated people. He had shown a proclivity for math and science and was fascinated by aviation. He did well in school, but his father could not afford to send him to college. A high school counselor told him he should be able to get scholarships, but that he needed something extra on his resume. Like what? Rayford had asked her. Extracurricular activities, student government, things like that. What about flying solo before I graduate? Now that would be impressive, she admitted. I've done it. That helped him earn a college education that led to military training and commercial flying. All the while, he said, I was a pretty good guy, good citizen, you know the drill. Drank a little, chased a little, never anything illegal. Never saw myself as a rascal. Patriotic, the whole bit. I was even a churchgoer. He told Mac he had been smitten with Irene from the beginning. She was a little too goody-goody for me, he admitted, but she was pretty and loving and selfless. She amazed me, I asked. She accepted, and though it turned out she was a lot more into church than I wasn't about to let her go. Rayford told of how he broke his promise to be a regular churchgoer. They had fights and Irene had shed tears, but he sensed she had resigned herself to the fact that, at least in this one area, I was a creep who couldn't be trusted. I was faithful, a good provider, respected in the community. I thought she was living with the rest of it. Anyway, she left me alone about it. She couldn't have been happy about it, but I told myself she didn't care. I sure didn't. When we had Chloe, I turned over a new leaf. I believed I was a new man. Seeing her born convinced me of miracles, forced me to acknowledge God, and made me want to be the best father and husband in history. I made no promises. I just started going back to church with Irene. Rayford explained how he realized that church wasn't that bad. Some of the same people who we saw at the country club we saw at church. We, sh- we showed up, gave our money, sang the songs, closed our eyes during the prayers, and listened to the homilies. Every once in a while, a sermon or part of one offended me, but I let it slide. Nobody was checking up on me. The same things offended most of our friends. We called it getting our toes stepped on, but it never happened twice in a row. Raper said he had never stopped to think about heaven or hell. They didn't talk much about that, well, never about hell. Any mention of heaven was that everybody winds up there eventually. I didn't want to be embarrassed in heaven by having done too many bad things. I compared myself with other guys and figures if they were going to make it, I was too. The thing is, Mac, I was happy. I know people say they feel some void in their life, but I didn't. To me, this was life. Funny thing was, Irene talked about feeling empty. I argued with her, sometimes a lot. I reminded her I was back in church and she hadn't even had to badger me about it. What more did she want? What Irene wanted, Rayford said, was something more, something deeper. She had friends who talked about a personal relationship with God, and it intrigued her. Scared me to death, Rayford said. I repeated the phrase so she could hear how wacky it sounded. Personal relationship with God? She said, of all things, yes. Through his son, Jesus Christ. Rayford shook his head. Well, I mean, you can imagine how that went down with me. Mac nodded. I know what I would have thought. Rayford said, I had just enough religion to make me feel all right. Saying words like God or Jesus Christ out loud in front of people, that was for pastors and priests and theologians. I resonated with people who said religion was private. Anybody who tried to convince you of something from the Bible or shared his faith with you, well, those guys were right wingers or zealots or fundamentalists or something. I stayed as far away from them as I could. I know what you mean, Max said. There was always somebody around trying to win souls for Jesus. Rayford nodded. Well, fast forward a whole bunch of years. Now we've got Rayford Jr. I had the same feeling when he was born as I had with Chloe. And I admit I had always wanted a son. I figured God must be pretty pleased with me to bless me that way. And let me tell you something. I've told precious few other people, Mac. I was almost unfaithful to Irene while she was pregnant with Raimi. I was drunk. It was at a company Christmas party, and it was stupid. I felt so guilty, not because of God, I don't think, but because of Irene. She didn't deserve that, but she never suspected, and that made it worse. I knew she loved me. I convinced myself I was the scum of the earth, and I made all kinds of bargains with God. Somewhere I had this idea he might punish me. I told him if I could just put this behind me and never do it again, would he please not let our unborn baby die? If anything had been wrong with our baby, I don't know what I would have done. But the baby had been perfect, Rayford explained. He soon got a promotion and a raise. They moved to a beautiful home in the suburbs. He kept going to church, and he was soon satisfied with his life again. But, 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 Max said, what happened then? Irene switched churches on me, Rayford said. You getting hungry? I'm sorry. Are you hungry? It's coming up on 1 o'clock. That's the storyteller you are. Leave me hanging so you can eat. You ran that all together like Irene's changing churches should make me hungry. Point me to the place to eat, Rayford said. I'll get us there. You'd better. And that's the end of chapter 5. And so next we'll be reading chapter 6. Thank you for joining me. Have a wonderful day.